Hello there, once again, Digital World. Welcome back to another episode of Spliced In Later, movie review time. It's finally here, after all the anticipation, all the build-up, all the not really wanting to go and see it, but we saw it anyway. Spliced In Later is here for you today to review Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the 5th Ghostbusters film in total, but the 4th in the actual timeline that is canon to the original film. If you listen to this show, you will know that there's been a lot of build-up to see this film, not on the positive sense. The Ghostbusters Afterlife review I did in 2021 was very negative, was not a fan of it at all. And the idea of having to go back to that world and these characters again did not thrill me. But I stick to things. I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, and you never know. You never know with movies whether things will get worse or better. But in preparation for this, we did a whole talk about the original Ghostbusters, what makes that so good, the 2016 Ghostbusters, the Ghostbusters franchise as a whole, its effect on people, what people should take away from it, what people for some reason think it is, and what it actually is. There's a whole thing you can go look at, as well as the original Afterlife review, if you want some context onto how I just did not want to see this film at all. The trailers didn't thrill me in the slightest. I just didn't want to. I couldn't get any of my friends to come see it with me either, so I had to go and see it by myself. In the lead up today, as I was getting ready to go see it in the evening, the review embargo also lifted on the movies. You know, the thing about review embargoes is if the reviews are coming out weeks and weeks before the movie itself comes out, that's a good sign, because normally they're positive reviews and they want to make everybody know this is a good film, go and see it, make it the money. But if a movie is below average or garbage, you tend to not see any reviews about it until the actual day of release, when they have no choice but to come out. And then normally they're not good. But by that point, I guess the idea is that people aren't looking for reviews on the day. If you're going to go see the film, you're going to see the film. I don't know. But yes, I believe the Rotten Tomatoes score wasn't very good. I saw some real bad reviews, which worried me, but also made me a little hopeful, because I was kind of in the minority with the last Afterlife. I thought it was garbage, and there tend to be more positivity to that one than negativity. Like, there seem to be genuinely people who thought it was pretty good. So if everybody thinks this one is bad, if they're the same people that thought the last one was good, either it's gotten even worse or it's gotten better. I really didn't know. But we've seen it. It's in my brain. We're ready to talk about it. And look, cards on the table, I actually thought it was pretty okay. Even bordering on pretty good. It's not great. It's not competent, I think. It's still pretty mid in terms of what you want and expect from a film. But I have to say, in terms of what I felt watching the movie and what I got out of it, I genuinely feel like I had a good time with this one. I felt like it was funny. Not all the jokes landed for sure, but there was definitely an attempt for it to be a comedy again. The big problem I had with Afterlife was this whole legacy sequel approach to it, where everything was this big nostalgia bait. Remember the Ecto-1 and the proton packs, but it was treated like this reverent sci-fi majestic thing that we all treasure, when it's just a silly Ghostbusters movie. It was a comedy. So to get this one and be like, cool, they're just making jokes, they're doing silly stuff, that's kind of what I want. And it was also an original idea. The last Afterlife was, doing new characters, but they were going up against the bad guys from the first Ghostbusters and almost beat for beat the same approach, just in a farm town instead of New York City. This movie has a completely different ghost, completely different mythology. Whether it's executed well or not, that's up to you, but I give them points for originality. And yeah, in terms of the story arcs that were going on in here, while not all of them worked or necessary, I felt more for this than I felt in any of the last few Ghostbusters films. So I'm going to go on record as saying this is definitely better than Afterlife. I would say it's better than Ghostbusters 2016 too. And honestly, I think in terms of what made the original Ghostbusters so good about it being a silly comedy set in New York fighting ghosts with some kooky characters, Frozen Empire is the closest to that mission statement. It doesn't get there. It by no means doesn't get an A or a B or even a C+, but it's got a C. And honestly, in the world of my vitriol for Ghostbusters Afterlife, that's more than I could have hoped going into this. So if you want to get a brief idea of what the plot is in Ghostbusters Afterlife, weirdly but also kind of goodly, everybody's back in New York. We've moved away from the farm from Afterlife. The Spengler family, so Harold Ramis's daughter and her kids, along with Paul Rudd's Gary Grubertson, who was their teacher in the farm place, now is dating the mum, but is not married, is not really being called a dad to the kids, Finn Wolfhard and McKenna Grace. But they've moved into the firehouse and they've officially become Ghostbusters. And they're running around New York trying to catch ghosts. And in true original Ghostbusters fashion, they're causing destruction and mayhem. And the city officials, including the mayor, who is Walter Peck, who was the original asshole bad guy in the first Ghostbusters, is immediately trying to shut them down. Specifically targeting McKenna Grace's Phoebe by saying that because she is only 16 years old, she shouldn't even be a Ghostbuster. She should be a normal kid with normal friends, not doing this stuff. And sort of to protect her, the family does start to push her out of being a Ghostbuster, which just makes her resentful and pushes back even more. While that's all going on, it's all being built in this world of a larger Ghostbusters Institute run by Ernie Hudson's Winston Zeddemore, where he's literally got a bunch of people working for him who are helping to expand the ghostbusting enterprise on a long-term scale, because they can't just keep shoving ghosts into that firehouse containment unit, because it's going to get full eventually. And while they're all doing that, Dan Aykroyd's Ray Stantz, one of the original Ghostbusters, who has his own little podcast show where he looks at possessed items, comes into possession from kooky character played by Kumail Nanjiani, a strange orb. Inside that strange orb is a terrible ice ghost, an ice ghost from legends eons ago that wants to literally just destroy humanity out of vengeance and disgust and all of that by freezing everybody to death and shattering them like glass. Through a series of events, this orb makes its way to Ernie Hudson's Ghostbusters base, comes into contact with the original Ghostbusters as well as the new Ghostbusters. You know what's going to happen. Eventually, this ghost is going to escape and cause havoc, and the Ghostbusters will have to reunite. Or just band together, because they're not really broken up. They're all sort of there to bring down evil Ice Ghost. And also restore the family dramas that's going on with the Spenglers, Phoebe proving herself as a Ghostbuster, Paul Rudd finding his place as the father figure to this group. And also importantly as well, letting Dan Aykroyd's Ray Stantz be who he wants to be. A big thing of this is that all the original Ghostbusters are sort of there helping out, but they have retired and they're moved on. But Ray, very much like Dan Aykroyd himself, doesn't want to let go of being a Ghostbuster. And a lot of his character arc in here is that he's being told he's old, he shouldn't be doing this stuff anymore. He needs to spend his golden years doing something more age appropriate and something that he would enjoy. But Dan Aykroyd is like, but this is what I want to do. It's not that I feel I have to. It makes me happy. In my last Twilight years, I want to do this. And in a way, it resonates with me more than anything else that has happened in any of these movies since the original Ghostbusters. And we'll get to that in a minute. But it's a very basic story. It's not too long. It's just under 2 hours. It does feel long, but I'll get to that in the negatives because of just how jam-packed it is and all the characters and what's going on. But we'll get to that. But on the whole, the positivity I have for it is that it genuinely felt entertaining and interesting. The mystery of the Ice Ghost and how all these different pieces come together, whether it's how Kumail Nanjiani is connected to the Ice Ghost legend more than just pawning the artifacts. He has a family lineage that makes him relevant to the story, as well as Phoebe's also befriended an actual ghost, a young girl who burnt to death. I will say the tone the tone is a little all over the place because Ghostbusters, I think, is designed to be a family movie. But sometimes it alludes to really dark stuff, which is probably good. It's character building for kids, I think, to deal with horrific, terrible ways to die. Anyway, I think the importance of Phoebe making friends with this ghost is that it's the first ghost she comes across, aside from her father, who isn't a Slimer or a weird dragon or a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. It's an actual person. And I think it brings a sense of humanity to ghosts in general. Like, I certainly thought about it when this ghost appeared and they were like playing chess together and talking about what it is to be alive and dead and humans and friendship and all of that. I'm like, this is probably the most depth a ghost has had in this whole thing. And it does put into context the idea of them catching all these ghosts and shoving them into these containers. Like, at what level are they conscious? Like, is this the right way to be approaching it? It doesn't really explore on that too much, but it opened up some possibilities of this franchise that I think has been neglected and is worth exploring in some capacity. The comedy is fun. As my big thing for Afterlife was that it wasn't funny. It didn't make jokes. It was just so reverent to the Ghostbusters. Like, oh, the Ghostbusters, the heroes of New York City. We love them. Like, tell a joke. Make me laugh. And Cards on the Table, Frozen Empire is a comedy. They have lots of jokes, lots of set pieces, lots of funny bits where people get slimed and gooped and all of that. It may not be as funny as the original. In fact, in a lot of places, you might just groan and go, ugh. But I can appreciate the effort for at least recognizing that Ghostbusters should have jokes in it. That's what I'm here for. That's what I want. May not land, sure. But honestly, just the fact that jokes were being told made me happy. So that was pretty good too. The nostalgia of them being in New York, that's what I think is probably going to happen in a lot of negative reviews. It's going to be like, oh, they're just back in New York and they're just doing the exact same thing they did before. They're in the firehouse. They're going up against Walter Peck. The Slimer's back. The Ghostbusters font is the same as the original Ghostbusters. And honestly, yeah, that's a valid thing to be wary of, especially currently in the Hollywood world that we live, where movies at the moment are not really designed to tell good stories and be necessary continuations of franchises, but just corporate CEOs looking at their IP brands and going, what will make me money? We have the Ghostbusters IP, so just make a Ghostbusters movie. Doesn't matter what's in it or not, it just may make me money, so do it. And it's not just Ghostbusters, it's Jurassic Park. Even recently, I just saw that there was a trailer for Beetlejuice, the sequel, Beetlejuice. I'm excited because I enjoyed the first Beetlejuice. But is it being made because they have a good idea for the sequel? Or is it being made because Warner Brothers went, what have we got? What IP? Oh, we never made a Beetlejuice sequel. Let's make that. Why not? So it is easy to fall into that jaded thing and you look at this movie and be, But if I had to choose between the nostalgia in this movie and nostalgia in the last one, I'd pick this one hands down, because the last one, the nostalgia was manufactured. It tried to make you think that you were emotional to see these characters again. Whereas with Frozen Empire, it's still corporate, but it's more a funny nods and references and allusions, which I think just fit better with the tone of a Ghostbusters movie than Afterlife. It's still hollow and shallow in some places, but it's also not glaringly obvious. If you had never seen the original Ghostbusters, if you go to Frozen Empire and you see the Ghostbusters text at the start, you wouldn't know that it's the same sort of font and coloring and very 80s style opening that the original had. So that's the thing that only fans of Ghostbusters will catch. And then those fans just have to choose if they're happy to see it or if it annoys them. And honestly, it depends on the person. I'm both ways. Sometimes I'll see something that is a reference to something else and I'll be like, oh, that's nice. And sometimes I'll be like, gosh, worst thing ever. So I'm fickle. So I understand how nostalgia can be a tricky thing to manage. And honestly, as I've just explained it, it could be that you're like, there's literally no difference between what you just said between those two movies and what are you trying to say. And that's fair. But I don't think the nostalgia is the prominent part of the film. Case in point, because it is an original story. The nostalgia for Afterlife was because remember Zool? Remember the time Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis turned into ghost dogs? Well, now Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon are going to do it. Remember that time they summoned the Keymaster or whatever? Well, we're going to do that now. The nostalgia and references in here are just allusions to things that have happened or nice little nods, but they are not impacting the story. They're not driving the story. The story of the ice ghost from millennia ago and how it's traveled along the way to get to the Ghostbusters now. The stuff about Kumail Nanjiani being a fire master. Phoebe's sense of isolation by not being a Ghostbuster and not having any friends at all, which is why she gravitates to the human ghost. The dynamic of Paul Rudd trying to test the waters about whether he should be a friend or a father to these kids now. Ray Stantz coming to terms with the fact that he is old but still wanting to be a Ghostbuster. It's new stuff for this franchise. They're new stories. They're new ways that these characters can be explored and developed. It's not everybody doing the same thing again, which is why this resonated with me so much, because at the very least, it's not something I haven't seen. It is something I haven't seen. It's not something I've seen before, just with a different colored tin on it, I guess, if that makes sense. And some of the performances here were pretty awesome. I really love McKenna Grace. I think she's a fantastic actor, and she is the heart and soul of the last two Ghostbusters movies. I don't like Afterlife, but I think she's really good in it, and she was my favorite part about it. And again, her arc in here is kind of emotional and nice. Plus, she does a really good job of channeling Harold Ramis's identity and persona, being her granddaughter in this thing. It's crazy. Like, you see McKenna Grace in real life, she looks nothing like Harold Ramis. But in this movie, not only does she look almost exactly like him, but she's got the mannerisms there that just work. It's just really good. She definitely holds the movie for me. I think Paul Rudd is a class act. He's good in everything, regardless of if everything around him isn't good. And I preferred him in this than Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I think the stuff about him sort of falling over himself to be a friend to these kids, but then also but I have to try and be authoritative, but what right do I have to do that? Is interesting. And I've never seen Paul Rudd play that type of character, and I thought he did really good. Plus, he kept things light. And even when he's telling really cheesy stuff, like he's trying to convince his girlfriend and their mother that she should continue being a Ghostbuster by just saying the lyrics to the Ghostbusters song to her. For any other comedian, that probably would be like, oh my God. But for Paul Rudd, it's charmingly cringy. So good for that. And the standout for me, as I've said a few times, Dan Aykroyd. I was unsure because, as I've said before, Dan Aykroyd is kind of a loose cannon. Just in terms of how he approaches things based on his personal belief in things, and also his idea of comedy can vary vastly depending on how much control he has on a product. He's fantastic in The Blues Brothers as a double act with John Belushi. When he's left on his own to do Blues Brothers 2000, leans into some pretty silly tendencies. And, he's been the one that's always tried to make the Ghostbusters a huge franchise and do all sorts of stuff, but also driven by his personal belief that the ghosts are real. And you're raising awareness of ghosts by doing Ghostbusters movies, which is very silly. And his cameo in Afterlife sucked. It was terrible. He was Exposition Man. Luckily, he's not Exposition Man in this one. Patton Oswalt does that instead. Instead, he is prominently the most featured original Ghostbusters in here, and he is the one that has the most to do and has a satisfying story. To see him try to exist in both the original Ghostbusters world and the new, sort of being retired but still doing ghosty stuff on his own, getting involved in adventures, facing off with ghosts, coming to terms with the fact that he is old though, so he can't do everything he could do before. But why should he stop just because he's old? Interesting stuff. And Dan Aykroyd actually plays it very well. He's very vulnerable, emotional. He's restrained in how he's approaching the source material. He was delightful. Honestly, Dan Aykroyd, fantastic stuff. Best part of the movie for me. What unfortunately really brings the movie down, though, is just its execution on very specific things. For the most part, as I said, it's an original story. It's interesting. There's a lot going on, but almost too much. There are so many different arcs and story beats that are happening in here, and I think like maybe 3 of them are relevant to the actual story at the end. You know, it's Phoebe's sense of isolation in the Ghostbusters world. It's Paul Rudd and the being a father or not sort of thing, and it's Dan Aykroyd's sense of uselessness. There's also a little thing going on with Kumail Nanjiani having potentially the power to be a pyromaniac, which is interesting, but doesn't actually execute particularly well in my opinion. But Kumail Nanjiani is funny, so that's fine. But that at least is relevant. He can control fire, so he is important to them stopping the ice ghosts, sure. But then you also have Ernie Hudson trying to start his business. You've got Walter Peck the mayor trying to shut everybody down. You've got Finn Wolfhard trying to catch a Slimer in the attic. You've got a bunch of different beats and stories and characters and all of this happening. And it's not balanced particularly well. So you will find at some points you're really engaged and interested. And at other times it's like, okay, move the story along a bit. A lot of that goes down to too many characters. There are too many characters in this movie. Pretty much everybody is back. You've got the entire Egon Spengler family from Afterlife. So Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, McKenna Grace, and Finn Wolfhard. You've got the friends of the new Ghostbusters from the first film. You've got Podcast and you've got Lucky. They're here, there too. You've got all the surviving original Ghostbusters cast. Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts. You got William Atherton back as Walter Peck. You got Kumail Nanjiani as the Fire Master. You've got the caught on fire ghost that Phoebe befriends. You've got Patton Oswalt as Exposition Man, and you've also got an additional lackey in the Ghostbusters world who's kind of like Scientist Man, who's also there. And these characters are here for the entire movie. None of them, with the exception of Patton Oswalt, they don't sort of come fill a point in the story and then go away. They're front and center and they're all doing things and they all have things to say and all want to do things. And it's just too much. If you have to cut anybody, I would easily have cut the friends of the Ghostbusters from the first Afterlife. Podcast I like that actor, I like that character, and he does do a couple of little things in here, but he could easily have been removed. Finn Wolfhard's girlfriend from the first one, she unfortunately is completely wasted. She does nothing. And the movie even trips over itself to try and explain why these 2 characters are in New York, because they don't live in New York. They have no reason to be there, but they're just there. And there's a point where like all these characters are being overwhelmed by the ice ghosts, and I'm like, there are like 15 people standing in this firehouse. Who are they all? And again, yeah, there's so many characters doing so many different things, but because it's so busy, it just detracts from the flow of the story. Poor Finn Wolfhard does not do anything. He has to be in the movie because he's part of the family, but they have nothing to do for him. He has 2 very brief scenes where he tries to catch a Slimer in the attic, which doesn't really go anywhere. But aside from that, you could pull him out of the movie and nothing would have changed. Patton Oswalt going like, I'm going to tell you all about the Ice Coast for 20 minutes. You could easily have just had Dan Aykroyd find that out himself. You don't need somebody else to come in, a brand new character to remember and understand and pay, essentially. You have to pay a whole new actor just to do stuff that Dan Aykroyd probably could have done himself. And look, the final thing we have to discuss, of course, is the original Ghostbusters. Now, they came back as a cameo at the end of Afterlife. Dan Aykroyd had a little cameo during it, but then, very controversially, at least for me, they all came back at the end out of nowhere to help fight the ghosts, and they made that horrible CGI Harold Ramis. And this is where Frozen Empire has more points than Afterlife. There's no CGI Harold Ramis in this. I was very worried for a second he was about to appear, but it turned out to be that fire ghost instead. So, you get a point for that. But a lot of the marketing for this has been because they're back in New York and because they're facing off against Walter Peck and doing the original Ghostbusters stuff in the firehouse, and because it's all being run by Ernie Hudson and whatever, that the original cast would be back in a prominent capacity, and they've certainly been advertised as such. That is not the case, and I think people just need to be prepared for that. Dan Aykroyd is in the movie for about 100%. Great stuff. Ernie Hudson, probably less than 50%. Annie Potts, 20%. And Bill Murray's in about 5%. Which, honestly, if you know anything about Bill Murray, that's to be expected. Honestly, Bill Murray, it looks like he just sort of wandered on set. They told him to do some stuff. And he went, cool, see you later. Now, that's kind of okay. The Peter Venkman character kind of aligns with Bill Murray's personality. And credit where credit's due. And Bill Murray is there. And he's doing like that dry sort of humor thing. It does fit with the character of Venkman. But it's also hollow. You can tell watching it that it's not Bill Murray wanting to do something. But just, I'm here because everybody else is. So I guess I have to be. There is a very funny moment though where he puts on sunglasses just so he can take them off to do the surprised, oh my God, what am I looking at thing. But apart from that, he's really not in it. Nothing. And he has nothing going on. There's no character story for him, nothing about Sigourney Weaver or anything like that. He's just there. And that's kind of the same for Annie Potts. She sort of shows up. She just appears in scenes and is just there to go, what? And then moves on. And even poor Ernie Hudson, like a lot of what's happening is because of what he's doing, but his motivations are all over the board. Sometimes he's desperate for everybody to be Ghostbusters. And then a couple of scenes later, he's like, the Ghostbusters are too dangerous for people like you or me. And then he's like, Ghostbusters should stop, we're too old. But then immediately he's suiting up to be a Ghostbuster. Dan Aykroyd is the only one that matches what you're told. He is in the movie, he's in the movie a lot, and he has a lot to do. And that knocks the movie down in points for me because you can't lie to people. You can't advertise and say, look, this is going to be something, and then it's not. I get that you want to get people to watch the movie by any means necessary. But if you promise that something's going to be a certain way, people go, and it's not that, they're just going to have a negative opinion, and most likely, of the movie as a whole. If people show up to this going, yes, we're going to see the Ghostbusters all together again, and get one brief scene of it at the end, they're going to be annoyed, and they'll look at the whole movie and be like, that sucked. So, I guess for that, just temper your expectations on that. But look, overall, Frozen Empire wasn't terrible. And I'm so happy about that. It's definitely my favorite Ghostbusters film outside of the original one. I think they do a lot more with what they have. More original storytelling, some emotional moments, some humor, finally, a comedy that it's supposed to be. It is just unfortunate that there's too much going on. There's too many characters, and the execution as a whole because of that tends to bog everything down and make it not a completely enjoyable experience all the way through. But I give it a 6 out of 10. Solid stuff. If you want to go see it this weekend, I would say, yeah, check it out. If you're a Ghostbusters fan, hopefully you'll like it. It's a step in the right direction. I don't know if they'll make any more, but if they do, keep stepping in the right direction. Do what you did with this one. Trim 20 characters out. Streamline your story. Focus it up. You might actually make a legitimately or as good as the first Ghostbusters film. There you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Next week will be some more reviews for you. Kung Fu Panda 4, finally. And also Godzilla and Kong. 2 movies that I'm very anxious to see and I hope are good. Because aside from Dune 2, nothing has really blown me away yet this year. I would like something soon. Please. Oh well, Planet of the Apes is coming. Fingers crossed. Until next week, thank you very much. I love and appreciate you as always. It means the world to me that anybody listens to me at all. And I hope that if you're a Ghostbusters fan, that you don't hate me for liking or not liking either of these movies. Anyway, until next time, you've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.